China's economy is fake. Now, I'm sure that's not a particularly controversial statement around these parts. Every single time I bring up the country in question, I emphatically state things to that exact effect. But it is something worth reiterating because it doesn't get said enough, especially in times like these with the TikTok story, where, of course, Biden has now reversed the TikTok and WeChat attempted bans by the Trump administration. Now, a lot of people on the right even have gone to this story and many other stories like it saying, but China's economy is going so well. Oh no, worried all about it. But the reality is, as I stated at the beginning of this video, China's economy is fake. And there is ample evidence to suggest that it is not at all stable, even a little bit. And the best evidence of this, just to go down a list, is one, shaking towers. Just recently, not a few weeks ago, one of the towers in China, one of the tallest towers in China, in fact, I think top 5, was shaking. And this is not 20 years after its construction. And, of course, the reason for this is not at all mysterious. The reason is because it got built before it was done being designed. Oh, man. But that's not all that's shanking, because China also had a chip factory explode, once again, not just a few weeks ago, on April 14th, a few months ago, really. And that's not all for things that are exploding and generally being worthless, because they also have massive mega malls. Now, this is quite an interesting aspect of the Chinese economy. They have these things called mega malls, which are 10-story, sometimes 20-story tall buildings of just shop fronts. And these are hundreds and thousands of shop fronts in just one mall. And what ends up happening is that all of these shops sell one specific thing and have a lot in stock of that specific thing, but don't seem to be selling a whole lot of it. And as evidence for this, some of these malls are going empty, including one which was once the biggest mall in China, now being almost entirely abandoned, with many shop fronts completely locked down and almost no foot traffic whatsoever. Obviously not a very good economic strategy. On top of that, China's urban development has been an absolute nightmare, leading to a particular phenomenon called a ghost city, a more extreme version of the ghost towns you'd see in America, back old gold mining towns in California or some stuff out west, just failed cities, failed towns, generally pretty small places. But the same cannot be said of China's ghost cities, because China's ghost cities live up to the name of city. They have massive high-rise apartments, they have skyscrapers out the wazoo, lots and lots of floor space and places for commerce and all that sort of stuff. Places that would, at least ostensibly, be prime places for lots of economic activity, but some of these places only have as much as 50,000 people living in them. Almost nothing, especially compared to the amount of unused apartmenture that is there, to the point where some estimates place $50 million worth of apartments being completely unused in some of these places. This, on top of the fact that Hollywood is seemingly at least starting to back out of China, to the point where the Hollywood Reporter, which is essentially Hollywood Pravda, is now reporting that the Hollywood China 11 seems to be ending, partially because of censorship, but also partially because despite the bluster about being the second highest box office in the world, China doesn't give the studios a whole lot of money. And I know this isn't a particularly recent study or story. It's going back to 2014, but the Wall Street Journal did a actual breakdown of this, and it turns out that the amount of money China gives to the studios is really pittance. Compare the $175 million estimated that studios got from American box offices to the paltry $27 million they got from China. Compare that especially to the UK, which easily surpassed $100 million. they aren't giving as much to this Hollywood as they're making it out to be. And this goes for a lot of their bluster. They don't have one of the greatest economies in the world. They don't have one of the highest grossing GDPs. They aren't growing at the rate they are saying. In fact, you don't just have to take my anecdotal examples that you see here. You can take statistical data and look at it and see that they aren't all they're cut out to be. In fact, not in 2018, there was a study done on the GDP of many dictatorships, using the analog of light production of a country, which is actually a very good direct comparison to GDP. And it turns out that China's economy has grown 30% less than it claims to have grown. To the point where in 2018, when it was claiming to have $10 trillion in GDP, it in fact barely broke $7 trillion, only getting to 7.5. Barely might be a bit overstating it, but this doesn't even, this makes the comparison to the American economy even more ridiculous, with America at that time having $17.7 trillion, to the point where China didn't even get to the halfway mark in comparison to America. Now, the question from all of this is why? And why do people keep falling for this? Because it's not as though this is the first time that a communist country has tricked everyone into believing their economy was totally peachy keen, and it turns out that they were collapsing under their feet. The Soviet Union was doing that in the 60s and 70s, to the point where people were actually surprised when they collapsed in the late 80s and early 90s. And the answer is this. China's a communist country. I know. Revelatory things from KelKidman over here. But it's worth restating, because a communist economy is not the same as a capitalist economy. A capitalist economy exists to move around resources efficiently. It exists purely so that people can get resources which are excess here and aren't enough here, and move them around as efficiently as possible to create a well-working society. But in communism, that is not the case. You see, in communism, the economy is simply a game. It isn't something that they do in order to keep their country solvent. It's something they do to gain power over other countries. The reason that China is upping their GDP numbers above where it really should be, well, first of all, it's because they have no way of actually calculating their GDP numbers, as they're, of course, communist countries. It's a communist country. But on top of that is because they want to look as good as possible in comparison to America. And a lot of this has to do with their fundamental strategy, which I have dubbed the paper tiger economy. You see, China's entire strategy is to attract foreign investors to their coffers so that they can get more money in and then be able to explode into essentially fake growth over and over again until they overtake the entire economy, and then humana, somehow we turn this stable. Of course, turning it stable is frankly a pipe dream, but the strategy itself is quite the scary one. What it ends up being is that their economy depends entirely upon their economics going up. All of their numbers need to go up at all times, otherwise they'll start scaring off investors. It is quite similar to many bubbles. Take Bitcoin bubbles, for example. I mean, I'm a supporter of Bitcoin, but even I accept that Bitcoin is fairly manipulated by hype. There are a lot of bubbles that happen with Bitcoin, and one just happened recently. But you see it rise to its peaks all the way to the top of the skies, and then eventually, as is inevitable through the law of economic gravity, it falls back down to earth, as it needs to in order to maintain any sort of stability. China is the same way, except, unlike Bitcoin, which does have some inherent value, or at least I believe so, China has no ground to fall onto. It has no basis upon which its economy actually exists. It only has the bubble. The bubble is the economy. And once that bubble pops, China collapses. And that's what will likely happen in the next 20-odd years, especially if what's happened over the past 4 years isn't a fluke. Because imagine this. Imagine believing that a stable economy could be so pressured in 4 years by frankly light resistance from the Trump administration over from 2017 to 2020 to the point where in 2020, China was on the brink of collapse, particularly in the first quarter, where their economic numbers stagnated. And take that in, folks, because as I've already established, China's numbers rely on going up in order to exist at all. So if they had gone even a little bit farther, if they had dropped even a little bit, they would have scared off the investors, the bubble would have popped, and everything would have come tumbling down, much like the towers or any of the other things which I've already itemized in this video. Of course, there are arguments against this sort of thing. Oh, China changed. It's no longer the same way it was back, I don't know, in the Great Leap Forward. Oh, really? Well, I think exactly the opposite, actually. If you look at some of the stories in the Great Leap Forward, most prime among them being a particular ditty going along the lines of Mao promoting steel production, getting a whole bunch of mediocre steel production that ended up being completely unusable, and causing a bunch of shortages. A very similar thing happens in China now. They are dealing with overproduction. And what's happening in China is that they are a communist economy funded by capitalism. And once you understand that, it suddenly all becomes clear. And why they're mediocre becomes clear. Because since they're still a communist economy and thus completely beholden to corruption, they can't get rid of things like academic cheating. Academic cheating is a massive problem in China. Massive. It's a malignant tumor, as is described in my source down below, as to this particular phenomena. What ends up happening in China is that they do a whole number of things, whether it be plagiarism, straight up cheating, bribing, to the point where most of the people who are high up in China's society are a bunch of C students acting as A students. And this is no better represented, of course, other than the architecture story, than by COVID-19. You see, COVID-19 was a lab leak. Now, I 100% believe that it was a lab leak, and I even am pretty sure that it was a bioweapon research that was being done for COVID-19. But where I break water with certain people on the right is people who say that, oh, China did it deliberately, because I just doesn't buy it. I just don't buy it. It doesn't gel completely. Because frankly, I don't see why China should release a bioweapon in its own borders. I don't see why it should release it a block away from where it was developed. And I do not see why China would leave so much evidence to be found about exactly where it came from. I frankly believe that it was an accident. And the better explanation as to how this sort of thing could be happened when these are really credentialed doctors, well, it's quite simple. All these people are incompetents. They're C students acting as A students. And what happens when they're moving house and the safety precautions get lax? Well, same thing that happens all over China. Problems. Blown up factories. Shaking towers. All of these sorts of things follow the rap of China much more closely than releasing it right next to their frickin' bioweapons research lab. And it's worth it to mention that releasing viruses on accident is not a new thing for China either. They've done it all of the 4 times before this point. All in the same area, by the way. Complete absurdity, of course. But it is absolutely true. And if there's one thing you can say about China's economy, is that it's still doing what it's always done. Produce landfills loads of absolute junk. Yeah. That's where I'm going to leave you guys off. If you enjoyed that video, do in fact subscribe down below to see me rant even more about all of these sorts of things. And if you're on YouTube or anywhere else, go and check out where I am elsewhere. I'm on Odyssey, I'm on BitChute, I'm on Minds, where I'll put my thoughts along with Gab and Parler, where you'll see me put out links to my videos. As well, check me out on breakingonthedaily.locals.com. I want to see those numbers get pumped up. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys off. I'm KelKidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.